Hi there, Infernal here. Today, I wanted to talk about Eco, which is a game I honestly always want to talk about because I love it so much. In fact, I'd consider it to be in my top 20 games of all time. But I also wanted to talk about Dark Souls, which, I'll be honest, I'd also put in my top 20. Specifically in this video, I want to compare the themes, mood, and atmosphere of Eco and Dark Souls, and explore the possibility that Dark Souls may have drawn inspiration from Eco. Now, clearly Eco is not even in the same realm as a Souls-like, so I'm not referring to the gameplay, but rather the feel of both games. The presentation that is absolutely oozing with atmosphere, and also the feelings of isolation that one can get from playing both games. So first of all, why do I love Eco so much? Is it because of the minimal but striking presentation? The charming characters? The world that is almost literally dripping with mood and atmosphere? Sure, all of these reasons. But I also wanted to talk about the impact this little game had on the larger world of video games. And as I mentioned earlier, the specific impact it might have had on Dark Souls, especially the first game. Eco is primarily the brainchild of director Fumito Ueda, a graduate of Osaka University of Arts, that Sony took a chance on back in 1997. Eco was on his mind even then, and in fact, when asked why he wanted to join Sony, his response was simply to create a game called Eco. Sony assigned Kenji Kaido to the Eco project, who was fresh off the game Ape Escape, which in itself was a clever way to show off the, at the time, exciting and brand new DualShock controllers for the PlayStation. Because the ambition of the project exceeded what the PlayStation 1 was capable of, it was ultimately shifted to the newer, again at the time, PlayStation 2. The game was ultimately released on September 30th, 2001, December of that year in Japan, as the first title from Team Eco. Eco has been praised as a work of art, even outside of the gaming industry. Guillermo del Toro and Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead fame have both sung its praises. Notably though, and related to this video, Dark Souls director Hidetaka Miyazaki had stated that Eco inspired him to get back into the gaming industry. After playing the game at a friend's house, he was, quote, quietly moved and silent by a, quote, beautiful, untold experience and story that I had never imagined. He went on to say, quote, and that's when I left the company I was working for at the time and started working for FromSoftware. I'm not exaggerating when I say that it was the game that changed my life, and I'm proud it was Eco and it was Ueda's game. Eco really is a work of art though. In fact, I consider it to be one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, even 2 decades later. Sure, the textures and game engine might be dated now, but the presentation remains astounding. As you explore the castle, the camera will sweep around, capturing the giant scale of the stone walls that contrast your comparatively tiny character. The view follows a side profile as Eco and Yorda cross bridges, showing the expanse of the landscape beyond. You're continually tempted by the world outside the castle, which feels simultaneously reachable, but also impossible. The game achieved this by guiding the player's eye as a cinematographer would, allowing nearly every moment to feel like a framed painting. In fact, it's a testament to how good art direction can make a game. And this is also true of Dark Souls, albeit in a slightly different sort of way. Even on its release, Dark Souls wasn't known particularly for pushing the hardware envelope. But the environment of Lordran is one of the most memorable gaming worlds for anyone doing a playthrough. Dark Souls doesn't manipulate or grab the camera from the player during gameplay as Eco does, especially since its focus is more on the gameplay combat experience. But still, it makes sure that each set piece is iconic and memorable. What Dark Souls does particularly well is contrast. Take Ornstein versus the gigantic, lumbering Smo. Take the relatively small player against basically any of the bosses. And the penultimate moment for me, when the player, after trudging through a sullen swamp at the bottom of the world, and then braving a dark tower full to the brim with traps, finally emerges to see the bright, glorious spectacle of Anor Londo. All of these are moments that, like Eco, remain embedded in the player's mind long after playing. As Eco starts, we see several mysterious masked men on horseback with a prisoner, a young boy with horns on his head. We soon learn that being born with horns is a curse in the village the boy hails from, that it becomes the blame of any misfortune that befalls the village. The tradition is to take the boy, when he turns 12, to a crumbling, dilapidated castle and imprison him within the walls, leaving him simply to die. The setup is incredibly cruel and depressing, and we immediately develop an emotional attachment to the young boy. It's here, in the cold, confining walls of the castle, that we start to take control of the character. When I play Dark Souls, I can't help but see the influences immediately, especially looking back on the game. In Dark Souls, for example, the character wakes up in a prison and seems to be completely alone at first. You're given some guidance from Oscar of Astora, but it's clear that ultimately you and your wits are the only things you initially have at your disposal. Both games also push the gameplay and throw the player to the wolves immediately. No real instruction is given except for slight messages on the floor. As Eco explores the desolate castle, it's not too long before he meets Yorda, another captive, and as far as the player knows, the only other person in the entire castle. Here's another Dark Souls moment for me. There are no non-hollow people left in the undead asylum, barring Oscar, who is well on his way to becoming hollow himself. And when the player looks over the expanse, one thing becomes clear. You're effectively alone in this world. You have to figure this out, and you're going to get very little in the form of a guiding hand. Loneliness, it seems, are the primary emotions the player is meant to feel throughout both games. But then, both games also celebrate overcoming adversity. Both throw you to the proverbial wolves at the start, but make the player want to persevere until they reach the end, whatever that might ultimately look like. There is a sense of hope amidst the crushing isolation. As we play Eco, we find out that Yorda isn't actually mute, but neither Eco nor the player can understand her strange, almost alien language. The language doesn't resemble any language spoken on Earth, but by design it's meant to be a mystery. It's unclear how she got in the castle in the first place, and even less clear why she was imprisoned there. These mysteries are what I love so much about Eco, though. You, the player, is meant to fill the space between the lines, to create a story as you enjoy the experience. There is a story present in the game, to be sure, but what I mean is that the player creates their own unique story about the way they play the game itself, almost like a meta experience. This is what good art does, after all. It conveys a message, despite barriers of language or culture. Dark Souls has a bit more, in terms of lore and dialogue, than Eco does, but nevertheless I still see the comparisons. None of the NPCs are particularly forthcoming about information, and when they are, it's purposely muddled and vague. Moreover, much of the history of Lordran has to be parceled out from item descriptions or brief descriptions in loading screens. Both games, Eco and Dark Souls, have a fog, both literally and metaphorically, that veils the world and forces the player to draw their own conclusions through their own exploration. Dark Souls, like Eco, allows players to absorb the world around them as they see fit. The only real certainty in Dark Souls, like all the other Souls games, is that the world is dying. As the player enters the world, they find evidence of kingdoms long past, monuments long since, crumbling away, and a population of people that have either long since gone mad or are well on the way to doing so. The lore of Dark Souls, like the presentation, is also where we find many contrasts. The game balances themes of dark versus light, sometimes very literally, and sometimes metaphorically. It's also a game where it's often difficult to know if the player is doing the right thing. We know that there's an age of fire versus an age of darkness, but it's often unclear if the enemies we're fighting are evil or simply roadblocks to an ulterior motive. Playing Eco, there's even more speculation and less presented fact. We know why Eco was thrown in the castle at the beginning, but we don't really see any of the world outside the castle during the whole game. Again, this is speculation, but perhaps the world is dying as well. Perhaps throwing Eco into the castle, because of his curse, is fueled by superstition, that this is the only way to prevent the world from dying. Maybe they know it's a fruitless act, but they've been doing it for countless years out of a cultural habit. We learn that the queen is the ruler of the castle in the game as we play it, and that Yorda is her daughter. Why is she so insistent on keeping Yorda imprisoned in the walls? We see that Yorda has a connection to the architecture of the castle in the way that she can manipulate the structures. But is she ultimately necessary for the continued existence of the castle? I believe there are real similarities with the way both games handle music. In particular, both games have long stretches of time with relative silence, the only sound being the player's footsteps, the occasional chirp of a bird, or the swing of a weapon. In fact, this is something I miss about later FromSoft games, is the inability to hear the armor clanking and things like that, which I think added a lot to the atmosphere. Eco chooses to put music at key moments, like its cutscenes, or when the player mercifully finds the couch save point. I love the save music in particular, which is as whimsical as it is ephemeral. As it should, it calms the player and allows them to breathe for a moment. Dark Souls chooses to have music during boss battles primarily. It's another way the game handles the contrast I mentioned earlier. Having large swaths of the game be the sounds of swinging swords and especially the clunk of player armor, but nothing else. And then, during a boss battle, we're presented with sweeping, bombastic music. It becomes clear, this is an important moment, and you will pay attention. Another music moment is, like Eco, during the moments of solace in Firelake Shrine. The player probably won't spend too much time in the shrine area, but while there, it's clear that it's meant to be a place of respite, to catch one's breath. It's Eco's couch moment, if you will. For this next section, just as a warning, there will be more major spoilers. At this point, this will be very big spoilers. And I realize these are for games that are 23 and 13 years old respectively, but I also feel that both games are worth experiencing in their entirety. If possible, I recommend playing through both games without any prior knowledge, although I realize this is next to impossible in our current age. So let's talk about how each game handles their endings. Once again, the player is left to make conclusions and fill in spaces between informational gaps. It's unclear in Dark Souls, in particular, if the ending is a good or particularly happy ending. The player is given the choice between embracing the Age of Dark and refusing to keep the first flame lit, or to rekindle the flame and continue the cycle anew. We learn that Gwyn has manipulated the people of the world to essentially keep this flame lit for unending cycles, often at the expense of the well-being of said world. Darkness feels like the right choice. But is it? Ultimately, it's unclear, but we as players enjoy the expansive mystery and speculation. In Eco, the ending seems generally happier, at least visually. The castle is seen crumbling as Eco escapes in a boat and sails to a nearby shore. When he awakes on the shore, he explores the area and finds Yorda washed up. She opens her eyes and looks at Eco as the game ends. There's not a ton there, but it feels right, doesn't it? But what about the queen's hold on the castle? Was she holding Yorda there because she was the only thing keeping the castle standing? Is that castle the last vestige of a dying civilization? Were Eco and Yorda actually killed in the castle? And is this the last image of Yorda looking at Eco actually a dying hallucination? The idea and image of the queen having a hold on a dying castle reminds me of how, in Dark Souls, we find that the god kingdom of Anor Londo is actually an illusion, and that Gwyn's son, is the only real person that remains there, casting a perpetual sunlight spell. When the illusion is shattered, we see that he was the only thing holding that together, and that the city, like much of the world, is plunged back into darkness. So with that, I think it's clear that even if Dark Souls wasn't directly influenced by Ico, there are fragments, themes, and atmosphere that both games share. While doing this video, it actually helped me appreciate both games even more than I already did, and it made me think of the power that strong, intentional art direction has on the presentation of a video game. In fact, it's one of the main reasons I play video games in the first place. Either way, both games will continue to be firmly implanted in my top 20, probably forever. It's a little bit of a different format from the other top 10 videos I've done, and I do want to make more of those, but I also want to have a more general commentary and essay videos as well. As always, I greatly appreciate the support, and I'll subscribe or comment goes a long way to making sure I can keep going with this. Have a great one and keep gaming.